Buenos días, mis amigos audiófilos y locos. Espero que estén bien. Hoy tengo el gran privilegio de tener al gran Peter Lederman, el arquitecto de la compañía Soundsmith, pero que anteriormente había trabajado con compañías muy prestigiosas como Bozak, is that how you say? Bozak? Bang & Olufsen. Anyway, Peter, how are you?
I'm very well, sir. How are you?
Good. The majority of my audience is in Spain right now, and I was wondering, how's your Spanish?
My Spanish is non-existent. Even going to Spain, which I did once, didn't help at all.
Okay. All right. Well, feel free to say anything you know.
I love your dog, by the way, and my dog knows when I'm having a Zoom meeting because exactly my dog brings me his toy when he knows before I start the meeting, because he knows I'm going to put a treat in the toy. Then he goes away and he knows I'm going to be busy, but he understands before Zoom meetings I'm going to have one. Don't ask me how he understands. But
yeah, I have her here to keep her from barking because they're very vocal, these Samoyeds.
Yeah.
But eventually she's going to go crazy anyway.
I understand.
So Peter, I understand that you went through the whole COVID thing. You had COVID, and are you all recovered?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much recovered. I have some residual symptoms from it, residual effects, some physical pain, but it never went in my lungs. I was taking vitamin D, 4,000 units a day starting last year, and they now know that that's very protective. So I took it since there was no downside to taking vitamin D. Of course, if you take too much, you can get kidney stones. But anyway, I was taking that. But I did have a lot of other effects from it, which were not pleasant. And but I was sick for about a month, but back at work and doing okay. Thank you.
Great. And I remember that Soundsmith, as well as many other small businesses, went through a rough time with that.
Yeah, we were closed for 4 months. Your dog wants another treat.
If it's distracting you, I will make her go away.
My dog is right behind me, but he was just bad. He just went in the garbage, so he's in jail behind me.
Okay.
The business was closed for 4 months. I came in, and that was very tough, but we made it through, and we're still struggling. We're a few people down. Yeah, we've lost a few employees, and so that's tough because everyone here works really hard. I have a really dedicated staff, and they're very committed. They're very wonderful human beings, and they have old world ethics about their jobs and their work. And that's actually hard to find these days, especially in the younger generation. You find very few people that have a work ethic in the younger generation. And I'm just glad I'm going to be dead when they're running the place.
Oh my God. Well, I've been unemployed since March, so I'm happy to go as an apprentice. I can make coffee.
Okay. You're hired. I don't even care what, as long as you're breathing and you're warm and you have a work ethic, you're absolutely hired. As long as you don't give signs of self-imploding.
Well,
as long as you don't lash out at the boss, I'm good with that.
You find that happens a lot working with you?
Yep.
People employed when they're around you?
Young people, and again, it's funny. I had a conversation with. This is an interesting subject. I had a conversation with one of my employees, a longtime employee, about this because he has young children, 16, 22, 23. And we were talking about the younger generation. Now, I'm the son of Holocaust survivors. And, for every one of me that exists, there are 1,000 that were never born. It's a weird statistic. But the children of Holocaust survivors have a certain psychology. There have been books written on it. There's one called Children of the Holocaust. One of the effects is that we are born, or we experience through osmosis maybe, a built-in panic about survival. And we got that from our parents who did survive, but came here to America just to survive. Well, actually, 75,000 Jews escaped Germany. It's a handful. And they went all over the world: Australia, England, United States, South America, the Far East, Philippines.
Yeah.
But all of them had a desire to survive, and their children picked up that worry or the fear about surviving. The younger generation, we haven't had a major war since World War II. The world, even though we've had wars, the world has been relatively at peace. Frank Schroeder pointed this out. So we've been at peace for 70 years. This is the longest stretch of humanity, if you think about it, where there's been no major war. So the younger generation, I'm not talking about the young people that served in Iraq and Afghanistan, obviously.
Korea and
Vietnam. But Korea, that's true. You had Korea and Vietnam. Yeah. But even Korea and Vietnam were small wars compared to World War II. So the younger generation they don't have the panic or the fear that my generation has about survival. So, it's a lot of them, things don't go back. They're going to go home and live with their parents. And I was on the street when I was 15. So there's not a drive or a fear, hey, I'm not going to be able to survive. So part of that's good, because why should people live with more fear than they need? We all need a little bit for our instinct for survival. But at times, it seems like the younger generation doesn't have enough. So it's this weird balance between a quality of life issue in terms of not carrying a lot of stress and not being able to perform at a job or find a job or train yourself or be trainable into a different field, like when a pandemic hits and you've got to find a new job in a new field. Older people, I think, understand this. The younger generation doesn't carry this fear, and I think they're a little lost in this pandemic, in a way.
Perhaps the word entitlement comes to mind.
Entitlement, correct. And absolutely. So, entitlement is a double-edged sword. It's removed some panic and fear, but it's also not instilled, it's not fired up the instinct for survival. It's interesting to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think immigrant refugees, also being called, they have a huge appreciation for life and for being able to come to this country and build with nothing.
Yep.
And so
it's Americans. It's second, third generation American millennials that,
Yes. And the new generations, including my daughter, have been raised with everything. They never have to work. We're terrible parents because we want to give her everything, and it's so hard for us to take the iPhone away. But when we do, it works. Well, so let me ask you a few questions. How did Soundsmith begin?
Are you going to ask me audio questions? I don't know anything about audio. How did Soundsmith begin? Well, it's a long story, and I think the best way to answer that, Soundsmith is over 50 years old. I always had a love of audio, and what I started to see in the 60s when I was working, I was 15, 16, and started working in the audio industry. What I was watching was the after effects, in part, of World War II. The United States built up countries after, the reparations we made, not reparations, but the effort we made to build up Japan and Europe after the war were humanitarian things that needed to be done. The Japanese are an amazing society, but they have to import 2/3 of their food, 2/3 of their energy. If they don't excel, they don't survive. And we got them started in the electronic industry after the war. And it took them a very short amount of time. Let's pick a number, 10 years, until they started huge electronic industries. Sony and Panasonic were some. And what I saw in the 60s was that they were starting to dominate the American audio industry. Now, on top of that, see, I told you this was a long answer. On top of that, there were new engineering fields. You had avionics, medical electronics, the digital age was starting. So you had software, digital circuitry. So between medical electronics, the government, and all of this, electronics were completely exploding. So people that would have studied to go into the analog engineering area got siphoned off into all of these new areas. That plus the fact there's nowhere you can go to study audio. There's no degree you can get. You have to study physics, maybe mechanical engineering. So the people in audio are generally self-taught, or they're degreed and they learned, they taught themselves after they were degreed. Or you went to work for an audio company and found somebody to mentor under in order to learn the field. It's a very small industry. So starting in the 60s, I started seeing the places where people could go to learn disappear. Well, and a lot of people that would have gone there to get siphoned off. So I was motivated, as I loved the field, to start a place that was a mentoring company. So that's what Soundsmith has been for over 50 years. We've mentored a huge number of people and fitted them for other jobs. Some of them have stayed in audio. Jeff Joseph was one of my students a long time ago. That's, people have asked me, what's the most important thing you've done with Soundsmith? And I would say it's providing jobs and security and training for people and giving something back to audio. So that's sort of the history of Soundsmith, how it started, why I started it, and how we try to continue it.
Right, and also we must remember that aeronautics and the space race drove people, physicists, to these kind of jobs. And I say that because I have a recurring joke in my channel where I call the people who are the super technical nerds, I call them the NASA scientists. And that's because we all know that a large part of the audio industry was founded, or a lot of people started after they worked with NASA or with military contractors. It just happened to be people who had these big jobs but also loved audio, and they found a way to make their own stuff.
Correct. And a lot of people that have been in audio historically are people that have, as I do, a love of music and science. So audio engineering is the intersection of music and science. And so it's no great wonder that a lot of people who have those two loves in life wind up somehow in the audio industry. But bear in mind, it's a tiny industry, and it's also a dying industry. The legacy engineers have largely died off over the last 30 years. They've not been replaced, 30 or 40 years. They've not been replaced. And, people have asked me, what's the most challenging thing about the audio industry? And I've said the fact that it's going to be gone in 10 years. All the legacy engineers are going to be gone, and they've not replaced themselves. And certainly art gets lost in certain fields and skills. But for a field as small as audio, I don't think people understand how devastated it will be in 10 or 15 years when the balance of the legacy engineers are gone.
Yeah, I've had that subject in my channel, about like, should I get rid of my LPs, blah, 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 as a teaser. But this stuff is for all guys.
Well, yeah, but there's some young people that are interested.
Yes.
What's a shame is that there aren't young people that are interested in the engineering aspect. Now, we have an exception. We have a young man who joined us a while back named Parker. He's 23. And, we're happy to have him here. But he's the exception, not the rule, in terms of people that are interested in going into audio. And
well, I had the opportunity to interview Parker a while ago in this channel. So we have his interview. And also, we have several projects for the channel, and one of them is a speaker for mono that you see in the background. And Parker is supposed to be the technical director for the figuring out all the crossover and everything. But have you seen him? He's a busy guy. I haven't had a chance to get together with him. I know he's very busy.
He's very busy it reminds me of when I was 23, and I had the energy to go with being 23.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a great guy, brilliant.
Now it takes me all day to do what I used to do all day.
Yeah, I understand. Now, and I empathize with what you said about the audio industry, because as you well known, in your town of Peekskill, the maker of Dultier, who makes my oboes and English horns, Paul Laubing, he's right now in his 80s and he's working alone in the shop. And I used to always go mostly for social visits because his instruments are unbeatable and they don't really need that much maintenance. But since this pandemic, he's lost also the one person that was helping him, and I've also volunteered to go and make coffee for him and sweep the floor. But yeah, it's once he's gone, every oboe and English horn today is made with CNC machines, which
Wow.
makes the wood go wildly, back and forth. Most instruments now crack a few weeks after you play them, and it took Paul an entire year to make one English horn. I have two of them. And so it's an old art, like you said.
It is an art, and a lot of audio is art as well. When you're making miniature transducers, especially microphones, phono cartridges, but loudspeakers included, a lot of the DNA of these transducers, of this type of gear, microphones, cartridges, loudspeakers, a lot of the DNA is in the camp of musical instruments. Only part of the DNA is in the camp of scientific instruments. If they had 100% of their DNA as scientific instruments, they would all sound the same. And they don't, by a wild, wild margin. And that's because the designer is coming at it from different perspectives, or more or less skill, more or less intuition into what are the important things. So just like the oboe maker, who you're referring to, it's an art form, because you can't just CNC a piece of, oh good Lord, I used to know the name of the wood they use from Africa for making oboes. What is that?
Mozambique, Granadilla,
Yep.
Mozambique.
Correct. So you can't just stick, a square stock of wood in a lathe and, with a 12-axis, or 5-axis or more CNC machine, hit a button and say, go. It requires someone to look at it as they're working at it. It is absolutely an art. And I remember speaking with him or one of his workers once, and they said only 1 out of 4 pieces of wood, as they're working on it, selected woods, will create an instrument, because as they're working on it, it gives up the ghost. So the fact that there are built-in stresses into that wood, which after a period of time relieve themselves by cracking. You have the same thing in electronics. You have what are called cracks around grain boundaries in eutectic metals, otherwise known as solder to most people. So there's a lot of technology there. There's a lot of art. And especially when you're making something, a tiny transducer, like a phono cartridge, your microscopic work and your understanding only works down to a certain scale. And beyond that, things are out of your control. So there's art, there's intuition, there's luck, there's statistics, and then there's science. And notice how the order that I put those things in, because science is at the end.
Yes.
Certainly it's a foundation, but without the others, anything you're going to make doesn't have a good chance of working well.
You've been known to say that sometimes things work in practice, but not in theory.
No, I had a fellow I worked with at IBM who was quite funny. And he used to say, he used to say, well, it works in practice, but the real question is, will it work in theory? And that was hysterical, and he always used to make me laugh when he said it. But you know, that's actually true, because when you come up with a new design, it seems the audio gods will let you design something, and the first one you make will be phenomenal. And then you're going to pay hell because the next 5 you make are going to be terrible. And you will not be able to figure out why the first one was so perfect. So it's almost as if the audio gods say, all right, we're going to give you this one. just to so you won't lose faith, so you won't lose hope. And now you've got to figure out why that one was so good and the 5 you made after that were not good. So, but yeah, that's why I love that thing. Well, it works in practice. The real question is, will it work in theory?
Would you say that that's why manufacturers of cartridges have so many models?
No, no, I think no. They're just filling a market need. I'd like to think that that's not true for Soundsmith. In fact, I've had marketing people. I'll throw something to my dog, my imaginary dog behind me.
I've thrown it a few times. He's actually caught it, so I was wondering.
Yeah, I'm sure your dog is overtrained like mine. My dog whines if I take the wrong road, like if I have to go shopping between home and work. He starts crying, "You're going the wrong way. What's wrong with you?" He's very smart. Good Lord, what were we just talking about? Got off of my dog.
He works in manufacturers make different models.
Oh yeah, models. So you know, I've been beat up roundly by marketing people who I know in the industry, and they told me I had too many models and I had to get rid of a bunch of them. And the thing is, an engineer would like to build everything that he can, but from a marketing standpoint, that's absolutely horrible. You need, in principle, to have good, better, best. More than 3 models creates what's called customer confusion. They will look, if you have 2 pages in a magazine and you've got 7 models here and 5 models here, they will look through these, look through those, get totally confused, then flip the page and go to another manufacturer.
Or you will get your phone lines flooded with questions.
Yeah, or that, right.
Which one? Well.
One or the other.
Yeah.
So I'd like to think that all the models that we still make and produce, we make 5 high output models, 4 low output models, that each one is very significant at their price point in terms of what they do. But I think most manufacturers are driven to produce products at different price points because that's what the market demands. You know, interesting story, Arnie Nudell, who was the founder of Infinity back in the late 60s, my friend Harry Rosenblum knew him very well. Of course, Harry was just a audio rep for many companies, Carver, Ortofon, and so on. And he knew Arnie, and Arnie came to him and said, I have a brand new speaker. This is the first Infinity speaker. And Harry asked him about it, and he said, what's it going to sell for? And he says, it's going to sell for $8,000, $79.99. And Harry said, wrong price. And Arnie Nudell said, what do you mean wrong price? He goes, move the price up to $18,000. And Nudell said, Harry, I'm not going to sell any at $18,000. And Harry said, you're not going to sell any at $8,000 either. He says, the people that can afford $8,000 can afford $18,000. And Arnie Nudell said, oh, he said, you know, you're right. And he introduced the speaker at the high price, and that's how Infinity got started. There are a lot of products, I'm not going to mention any names, for cartridges that have ridiculously high prices. Are they worth that? I'm not going to comment about that. What I can say is that if you don't move your price up high enough, there are certain people that won't buy it because the price is not high enough.
Yeah.
I've got too much conscience to do that about my products, so I don't do it. But certainly there are people in the industry who do it. There are some ridiculously high-priced audio components, and you know, I understand the need to amortize your investment. So if you're a sole proprietor and you spent 5 years developing a product, I don't care what it is, loudspeaker, amplifier, and you're only going to produce handfuls of them, okay, I get it. You've got to get paid back for those 5 years, and you got to get paid back for your time if you're the only one hand building them. So fine. Then it's like the oboe maker that you're talking about who spent a lifetime developing. That's fine. Put a high price on it, then you can understand why it has that high price. But for a mass manufacturer to put an incredibly high price on something that may not have a huge amount of development on it, but that has an ornament on it or has something to make it look fancy, or they plated the whole thing in gold, or whatever. I'm sorry, that's audio snake oil, and there are unfortunately people who will buy them because it's gold plated. That's unfortunate, but Mark Twain, the famous writer, he said 99% of the world is comprised of fools, and the remaining 1% lies in great danger of contamination.
That's great. Great. He had the best quotes.
He was brilliant.
Yeah.
He was brilliant.
So soundsmith, I don't want to make a mistake here, but I understand that.
Oh, go ahead, make a mistake. It's all right.
Most of the cartridges you make are a moving iron. Is that correct?
All of them except for the strain gauge, correct.
Okay, all right. I don't know why I thought that some of them were advertised as moving magnet, but maybe it's because of the resistance, No,
the 5 high output models are compatible with moving magnet preamps.
Okay,
that's the others are compatible with moving coil preamps.
And this started out of your reputation for repairing and building Bang & Olufsen cartridges, correct?
Correct. The basic design of our magnetic cartridges are from the B&O design. We got the license from B&O over 20 years ago. B&O stopped manufacturing their cartridges in 1986. And we've been servicing B&O equipment for 50 years. So we're intimately familiar with B&O and those cartridges. B&O is an interesting company. There are audiophiles will sort of turn up their nose at B&O equipment. And part of that I kind of understand, because the main focus of B&O, in a sense, has always been the aesthetics, how it looks and how it fits into your home. And that's important. Yeah. But B&O they have an incredible history that goes back before the war. They've had brilliant engineering. They've made incredible products. And there are certain of their products where the engineering just pops way above the rest of their products, which were at a very high level. And one of those things that pops way up was their cartridges. When they developed their moving microcross system, they did a white paper which showed that they were outperforming moving coil cartridges, and that the evolution into the future would reduce the moving mass, and they would continue to outperform any evolution of moving coil cartridges. That turned out to be true. And B&O went through 3 generations, hold it up to the camera, 3 generations. I can't go 3 like this, 3 generations of cartridge designs, every time dramatically making improvements. It's a brilliant design. In a number of respects. We have a page on our website called Why Fixed Coil Kicks Ass. So anyone who's interested can read that. It lists all of the reasons we don't make moving coil and why what we do is superior to moving coil. But
I will put the link in the description so people can.
Okay. What we've done is taken the design. The reason I was so interested in getting the license was because obviously we needed to stay in business and pay our employees, but there was a need for B&O cartridges. B&O was in a weird position because I don't know if you know this, but analog died, vinyl died. I always said it didn't die, it just smelled bad. But you like that? Okay, you can use that. So, B&O must have had millions of dollars worth of cartridges, and they thought they were going to sit on a shelf forever. Well, obviously, it's not what happened. And as vinyl came roaring back, they started selling out. We had a very good relationship with them, and we were fortunate in getting the license and making a deal with them. looking at the design, I realized the beauty of it, one of the many beauties of it, was that it could continue to be improved upon. So we've gone 4 generations of designs since we started. And it's still not done. It's just a brilliant design. Moving coils, in terms of their basic design, have hit a ceiling. That's it. You can't reduce the mass effectively below a certain point. You're done. It's sort of like it's finished evolving, but it's not exactly like the Nautilus in the ocean that's evolved to perfection. It's more like something else that's waiting to go extinct because it can't evolve any further. But they took over the market. They dominated the market because they supposedly had lower moving mass than moving magnet. The bottom line is it was a brilliant design. It's still a brilliant design, and they're rebuildable, unlike moving coil. So I was thrilled to be able to develop a soundsmith design for a 1/2-inch mount, and all of our cartridges are rebuildable multiple times for 20% or less. So you can say a phrase with our cartridges that you cannot say with other cartridges. Our cartridges have long-term value. Forget the performance for a minute, performance improvements. It's a cartridge, and when you buy, it's an investment, like a car. You can put new tires on it. You can do the suspension. You can have it rebuilt. Imagine if you bought a car that couldn't be fixed. That's what other cartridges are.
Well, some are like that today. Some are disposable. You know, some are meant to be recycled. You know.
I know.
But yes. So you have the modern equivalent of a vintage product, something that's made to be serviced.
Correct. So that's really well put. Thank you. It is, and we believe in value. You know, we stand behind our customers. When a customer buys, you know, I mean, imagine buying a $4,000 or $5,000, $8,000 cartridge, and you have an accident with it. It's like, all right, now I got to go out in the garage and shoot myself. You know.
Or the cleaning lady.
Oh, please, yeah, I could give you a list. The cleaning lady, the cat, the children, the cat, the wife. The wife usually is 4 or 5 because they don't want to get in trouble. It's often number 1 or 2.
Well, the wife is because you left it running at the end. That was your fault.
Yeah, that was your fault because you passed out in the chair with a drink in your hand. That's right. But I mean, you feel terrible when you spend that much money on something and it can't be serviced. So all of our cartridges can be rebuilt multiple times for 20% all the way down to 11%. And that's how it should be. When a customer buys a soundsmith product, we stand behind the customer. And it's not about money. It's about you know, having loyal customers who understand what we do and want to support what we do because we're into, you know, sound. We're into the quality of sound, and we're here for the long haul. So if we get enough customers, then we'll stay for the long haul.
Bang & Olufsen is an interesting subject. I've had that. We've spoken about that in a few interviews, including with Parker, because they introduced incredible technologies in the 60s and 70s, like, you know, microelectric cells, the buttons that light up and touch sensitive. And then Parker was telling me about like the propulsion system for some of the turntables. It's basically like Star Trek technology. So I think that maybe these people were aliens because there's too much technology and people were not ready for it.
I think the Hungarians are proof of aliens. I think Richard Feynman, who the famous Nobel laureate physicist, he was asked whether he believed in aliens, and he said, "Oh, of course." And they said, "Well, Dr. Feynman, you seem pretty sure." And he said, "Oh, I'm absolutely sure." They said, "Well, how can you be so sure?" He said, "Well, the Hungarians." They said, "The Hungarians?" He said, "Absolutely." He said, "Their IQ is like average 15, 20 points above anyone in the rest of the planet. They're obviously aliens."
And a great contribution to Western music. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, you know, but I do believe, you know, the thing about Scandinavia that I think people don't think about, and I was fascinated because when I fly to the Munich high-end show, I fly Iceland Air, which is a wonderful airline.
So you get to stay in Reykjavik for a day?
For an hour, which is fine. And I've had an interesting experience there, which I'll tell you about some other time. But, you know, on the flight over, they tell you things about your dog missed. your dog missed.
That's because she's facing backwards.
Yeah, tell her to turn around. The thing is, I think 70 or 80% of Icelanders are college graduates. You know, an amazing thing happens when it's dark 9 months of the year. You open a book, you study. So a huge number of people in the Scandinavian countries are highly educated. This is why Tandberg equipment was so beautifully engineered and designed. You know, these people in Norway, what are you going to do when it's dark? You're going to read books, study, get a degree, sit inside and make music and play music. That's what it will do. There are other things you can do in the dark too, which I won't talk about because of your potential young audience.
Because my dog is here.
Because your dog is there, and my dog is there too. I can't mention it. He's still a virgin, so I can't mention it. I can't mention it. I don't want him to know. But people don't realize that the people in Scandinavia are brilliant because of the darkness, I think. That's my theory. Oh, your dog is begging.
And they underestimate the product because it looks so nice. They think it has to look like Macintosh, or like it has to look something big and heavy.
They believe, I think the public, a certain percentage of the public believes that the only focus is aesthetic. And whereas obviously the Scandinavians have wonderful aesthetic, that's certainly not by any means the motivation for doing what they do. And if you look at what B&O did going back to the 40s, before the war, these people were, you know, Bang and Olufsen were very invested in making really the best equipment that could be made. So they had an interesting history.
All right, so going back to cartridges, and I know that the subject of moving coil is not your favorite, but I want to ask you, since I have one, the Miyajima cross-ring moving coil patent. Are you familiar with that? What's your view on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, as a manufacturer and designer, I can't talk about other companies or their designs. It's part of my audio faith tradition. It's inappropriate when other manufacturers talk about other manufacturers. I always go, that's wrong. Just don't do it. I can talk about concepts. I can talk about, you know, moving coil cartridges and what aspects of moving coil I don't like. Right. I've rebuilt them forever. Yes. I've rebuilt a huge number of cartridges, and obviously almost all of them are moving coil. And certainly people have tried to improve moving coil cartridges, but I can't comment on what a particular manufacturer has done or not done that might or might not be better. That's inappropriate for me as a manufacturer.
All right, so let's circle the wagons. So basically, moving magnet is very convenient, but it suffers from having bigger magnets and mass, and not as quick, not as...
Mostly correct. There were some notable efforts to make some moving magnet designs that were exceptional. Now, when I say exceptional, I have to qualify that. I can talk about products where the manufacturer is no longer making them, or they're out of business.
That was going to be one of my questions. Well, yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask you.
So, for instance, you have the Shure V15, and I just have this gut feeling that this is just my intuition. It's not based in fact at all that I know. But I think some marketing guy went to the engineering department and said, I have a great idea. I want you to design a cartridge. We're going to make a test record. We're going to call it, I don't know.
The Shure tracking.
Let's call it the Shure obstacle course.
Yes.
The trackability record.
Yes.
And you make a cartridge that will play it, and no other cartridge in the world will track that record. And the engineers went, yeah, we could probably do that. So they did it. How does it sound? I was never a fan. It used to be, you turn it up, my fillings used to fall out and my wristwatch loosen. But it tracked it 3/4 of a gram, and it had use of replaceable styling. And yes, it was fast. Another example, the Grace cartridge. We make replacement styling for the Grace. Very low mass moving magnet design. There have been others. So there are ways of doing it. But the bulk of moving magnet designs were for mass market, lower cost, lower performance customers with user replaceable styli, which obviously is a huge advantage.
And an easy phono stage,
Correct.
situation.
Correct. A low gain phono stage, easy to build. Correct.
Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we have moving coil, which is, of course, a sophisticated design and a more detailed retrieval, but a very delicate suspension and very low output, which requires headaches with home and noisy phono preamps, etc. You fill in the blanks.
Well, there are a lot of things I don't like about moving coil. If you have an accident with them, the suspensions are, as you mentioned, are delicate, easily damaged. The armature or coil assembly is yanked back into a damper. And if you pull it back too hard, you'll damp too much of the movement and it'll sound dead. Think about musical instruments, same thing. If you don't pull it back hard enough, it's not damped well, and it can rotate. So the skating forces of the record can actually rotate the coil. There's one manufacturer that makes one model of cartridge, although we've seen it with many, that within the first 10 hours, if your skating forces are not correct, the azimuth of the stylus will walk off about 10 degrees. We grab the cantilever, rotate it back 10 degrees. They did that to make the cartridge sound better, but if you don't have your skating forces right, so there are a lot of things about moving coil. Plus, work hardening. If you take a coat hanger, bend it back and forth a bunch of times, bing, the wire breaks.
Fatigue.
That's called metal fatigue, work hardening. What you're doing is you're taking layers of crystals and breaking them up into smaller and smaller crystals to where the molecular forces between them are minimal, and it cracks at what are called grain boundaries, which you're breaking up the wire into smaller and smaller grains as you're work hardening it. And since there are wires leading out from the armature in the moving coil, every time it moves, and it's a design where the wire, you'd like to get it to flex over the whole length of it so it lasts a long time, but very often the wire pivots right at the coil, so it breaks right at the coil. So it's got a lot of inherent design flaws. The list goes on and on that I'm not a big fan of. Plus the large moving mass. You've got to move this relatively large mass. Our cartridges have 5 to 8 times, not 50 to 80%, 5 to 8 times lower internal moving mass than moving coil. And we have a picture of that on that page called Why Fixed Coil Kicks Ass. So,
and I will put a description, a link in the description.
Right.
Well, I do own a few moving iron cartridges that are from companies that don't exist anymore. And although I do have some kind of a weird stigma for them, I tend to think that they sound more like an AM radio compared to the moving coils. They do excel in transients. If I'm listening to Tchaikovsky or Mahler or anything that has a big conglomerate of instruments and quick percussion, the moving irons that I have are always the fastest. Why is that? And also, what about the stereotype that I have about the sound, maybe sounding a little bit dull, or is that justified or not?
It may be. The thing is, I never tell people what they can hear or what they're capable of hearing. We all hear differently. So, but you don't have a Soundsmith cartridge, do you?
Right now, I have $500 in my bank account. I'm just listening to you. I want to buy one right away. If I can buy it in installments, I would.
See, I would be curious as to, you have hearing that may be better or worse than the next person. I have no way of knowing that. But I would be curious how one of my moving irons sounds compared to your other moving irons. Let me say this. Anything can be done incorrectly. Just because you have a wheel doesn't mean it's round.
That's right.
So any brilliant idea can be ruined just because you are making a cartridge that's based on reflected light, or one that's based on a strain gauge as we do, or one that's based on a magnetic system, that doesn't render godlike perfection because of the technology. We have an ad for one of our cartridges called the Zeppelin Star, and it's a picture of the star, the Zeppelin Star, and above, on top of the picture, it says details, 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 and on the bottom it says the devil's address. The devil is in the details, and just because you build a certain technology, that doesn't mean it's going to work. It's how you've implemented it.
True, of course. Yeah. Well, well, I hope someday well, you know what? I have heard your cartridges with you in your store, and they don't sound dull to me at all. And one thing I remember, which I told you, which is something that you talk about also in one of your lectures at the Rocky Mountain audio show, is that your cartridges were so fast and so vivid that it sounded, in the best sense of the word, like digital. It didn't sound sluggish. It didn't sound noisy. It just didn't sound like the pitch was low. It sounded alive. It sounded dynamic, as if everything we were listening to was in 45 RPM.
Well, again, one of the soapboxes I get on is something called Stylus Jitter. So you have a cantilever with a stylus, and it's jittering in the groove because there's energy coming back down the cantilever, a natural resonant frequency, which makes energy go the wrong way, plus reflected energy. Think about a broomstick glued into a brick wall and you pluck the broomstick.
Ah.
You don't have to be Enrico Fermi to figure out what happens. The energy goes up and it reflects back down. So the more mass you have back here inside the cartridge, it's like a wall. So the energy reflects back down. So you're asking the energy that's coming back down, you're telling the stylus here at the tip, this little mass, to move the record. It can't do it. So what the stylus does is it leaves the groove wall and bangs its way down the groove, banging. Mm-hmm. It's like somebody who's had too much to drink driving down the road, banging off the fences, the curb of the road. Well, that's how the stylus gets rid of the energy, by banging into the groove walls. So what it's doing is it's taking a sample. It takes a sample here, then it takes a sample here, then a sample here. So you might say, well, wait a minute. If it's only sampling like digital, the groove walls of a record, how can I hear music? It's a good question. The answer is, if you remember being a kid and you had that thing that went on the front tire of your bike that ran the headlight of your bicycle, and the faster you went, the brighter the headlight went. That's because that's a magnetic generator, like a cartridge.
Yeah.
And as long as it's moving, it makes a voltage. So even though the stylus is sampling the groove, as long as it's moving, it makes a waveform. Is the waveform representative of what's on the record? Not well. How do you improve it? More samples, less mass, less reflected energy, better contact with the groove walls. When you do that, all kinds of positive things happen. Lower noise, lower wear, much more detail, lower distortion. The list just goes on and on and on. So that's why I'm so enamored with the design that we do. Now, the strain gauge, of course, is an extreme example of that, because the strain gauge has all this mass back here that normally has to be moved to make a voltage. The strain gauge, this mass doesn't exist. So it's like a perfectly terminated cantilever. The energy goes up, almost none reflects back down. So it doesn't jitter in the groove. So it plays the groove beautifully. And empirical proof of that is that when you try to play a lacquer that's cut on a Norman lathe, a 12-inch one called a dub or a 14-inch, you can play lacquers about 3 or 4 times before they're destroyed, because the material is like shellac. It's very soft. I have lacquers I've played over 200 times with the strain gauge. No noise, no stripping of high frequency. They sound like the day they were made. It's because it's the jittering that destroys the lacquer. As long as you're tracing smoothly with it, you don't destroy it. So the strain gauge is an extreme example of what happens when you have very, very high sampling of the groove, really good statistical contact with the groove wall.
Well, that's because does the strain gauge has an outboard generation of the motor is basically what you would have in the body. It's outside, right? It's an active system of generating the
way the strain gauge works is that every cantilever has a suspension to hold it. So when it goes down on the record, what the strain gauge does, it has elements that couple to this suspension. So the energy that's lost normally would be lost in the suspension is picked up by two semiconductor strain gauge elements. It's almost like if you had a device hooked up to the shock absorbers of your car and you recorded what the device told you the shocks were doing, you would get a profile of the road.
So then that gets sent to an outboard.
Correct. There's an outboard device that provides a current to the cartridge, and the cartridge modulates the current. It's like a garden hose. It squeezes it, how much water is going through. So it modulates the current, and the outboard unit converts the current to voltage, amplifies it, bingo, signal off the record.
Wow. I have another big question. Tell us about anti-skating. I know you're big and into that, and you have a sort of a not the normal or the usual view that people have about anti-skating, how to set it up.
My view comes primarily from Frank Schroeder, the great tone arm designer, who I'm very good friends with. And by the way, I speak with him fairly regularly. And by the way, I should share with you, he said something to me the other day that was pretty much the funniest thing I've ever heard him say. We were talking about aliens here at the beginning of the conversation. You and I were talking about aliens. So I said, well, Frank, with every passing day, it becomes more and more obvious why the aliens don't contact us. And he said, well, they can't. And I said, why? He said, well, it affects the betting.
The betting?
betting. You'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning laughing your ass off. Okay. You think about it enough. So anyway, but Frank was the one who pointed out, and he's a brilliant, engineer. He was the one that pointed out that all records with test sections for anti-skating are wrong. That those sections typically are recorded at 80 or 90% modulation. And they tell you adjust your anti-skating so you get equal distortion out of both speakers or no distortion out of both speakers. And that's wrong. The only way that setting is correct is if you're listening to hip hop or heavy metal only. Since skating forces are a function of how loud the music is, it's a moving target. So how do you adjust it properly? Well, if you think about music spends 90 to 95% of its time at about 30 or 40% volume. That means that 90% of your record, 95% maybe, is roughly about 30 or 40% level. Yes, there are moments of pianissimos, there are moments of crescendos, but most of the recording is sort of 30 or 40% modulation, which means you should set the anti-skating to be correct for 30 or 40% modulation. Makes sense because Frank makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. So he measured it and figured out a reverse method for adjusting your anti-skating without any tools, without anything special. And we put that method on our website, and everyone, your dog is going to eat you alive. You better toss a treat.
I'm gonna let her go. Just give me a second.
Okay, you let her go. Tell her to go eat somebody. Go eat somebody. Go kill somebody. Go ahead. There we go. So Frank came up with a very clever method. For adjusting anti-skating. We have it on our website. Requires no tools, nothing special. And everyone that's used that advice over the many, many years has always come back to us and said, wow, everything sounds so much better. And by the way, that method gives you equal stylus wear on each side and equal record wear. So it's just the right thing to do.
I learned your method through Mike Trey, who was here at my house. He set up a turntable I had. And I have the DJ record. You know, you can get the DJ records that are flat on one side where nothing is recorded.
Right.
And you just basically let the needle gently sweep very slowly across the record.
But you don't need an unmodulated record. If you have a short LP, you can use the dead wax area at the end of the record. You just have to drop the stylus between the runout grooves. It'll stay there for a moment before it pops into the groove. And you just watch it. It should slowly move in. That works with any stylus shape, any tracking force, any cartridge. The reason is the tip of the stylus, just the tip, is an industry standard radius. And so since that's pretty much standardized, that on the surface of vinyl will be always pretty much the same in terms of what's called a frictional coefficient. So people have asked me, well, can I use a CD for that? No, it's not vinyl. It's a different plastic formula. So it will have a different frictional coefficient.
Great. Now, going back to your cartridges, if all of your cartridges are basically moving iron, would that really translate to 47K resistance as in moving magnet?
No, 5 of our designs are high output. So they get used with a moving magnet preamp, which is 47K load, gain of around 40 to 45. And 4 of our designs are low output. So they're designed for a moving coil preamp with a gain of 60 to 65 and load of 470 ohms minimum load.
Ah, that's so interesting. And the advantages of that are even less mass, right?
Yes. So people have asked me, why have you relegated most, not all, but most of your designs to low output? Is there an advantage to low output? And the answer is no.
Oh, but there's less windings or no? Oh.
There are less windings. And the beauty of my designs is you can increase or decrease the windings and it doesn't affect the performance because the windings aren't moving. The coils are fixed. So people have said, well, why have you relegated your higher performance, not all, but most of your higher performance designs to low output designs? And the reason is marketing. It's market driven.
So people can use their fancy phono stages and play with it. Okay.
I'm driven by the market because people who have very expensive phono stages, they're almost always moving coil preamps.
So it's so ironic because then you can use your high output cartridges with a vulgar phono preamp, so to speak. I mean, with just any moving magnet, but of course there's also a soundsmith phono preamp.
Right, we make a number of small phono preamps, and it is true that a simpler phono preamp can sound better. That is, getting rid of a transformer, not requiring a transformer, and so on. So, but unfortunately, and we do make some top high output cartridge designs like the Voice, the AIDA, even our Zephyr Mark III. Those are the 3 top high output cartridges, and they're not slouches. They're good cartridges, and they're designed for use with moving magnet preamps. Don't require a transformer. So in principle, could have better sound because of that.
Wow, that's great. So now tell me a little bit about your friendship with Peter Schroeder. You also are collaborating into making arms, right? You have your soundsmith signature arms.
Frank Schroeder. Frank gave us a design called the Alto, and we're supposed to be producing it, and hopefully we will be in the very near future. We've had some challenges here. It's a small company with personnel, and more recently with the industry and COVID, but we're hoping to produce that arm. It's a very clever design. It's called the Alto. It will sell for around 6K. And, you know, there are many brilliant things about Frank's designs. One of them, and it may seem a small thing to a lot of people, but to me, it's not small at all, is that they're designs that don't degrade with time. A normal bearing tone arm has the potential to get worse from the day you install it. Frank's arms don't degrade. This is the sign of a brilliant, brilliant designer. And the alto certainly falls into that category. Once you set it up and get it adjusted correctly and so on, 50 years later, that arm's going to be as good as the first day you installed it. And I like things that give long-term value. And that's one of the benefits of Frank's arms, aside from the sonic performances.
Alto, that's an interesting name. Is that because it's a 12-inch arm? What is the length of this?
It's going to be roughly 11-inch, but alto stands for asymmetrical loaded topology.
Oh, I was thinking more like viola, English horn,
cello,
which is an alto range, right?
I asked Frank what the name is, and he said alto, and I said, and because asymmetrical loaded topology. I said, okay, Frank, thanks. That's great.
Well, I should let you go soon. We've been.
Yeah, I have to go glue my fingers together.
One last question.
Okay.
What is your take on idler wheel turntables?
That's fascinating subject. So everything has pluses and minuses. There's very little that's perfect in this world. By the way, I think God did that on purpose, by the way.
What? Idler wheels? No.
No, not made anything perfect on this world.
Oh, yes.
I just thought I'd point that out.
Okay.
For people who are like-minded like me,
yeah.
That there's a reason that things are not perfect down here. Idlers have advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage is that you're hard coupled to the drive system. So any irregularities in the drive system get translated into the platter. If your drive system is very smooth, then an idler design can work very, very well. Whereas a belt drive, the give and take of the belt absorbs a lot of potentially bad things or energies that can be in the drive system. They get lost in the belt. What's the drawback of the belt? Well, the belt has a lower mechanical impedance, so the drag of the stylus can change the speed of the platter. Whereas with a hard drive system, with a high, a high force drive system with a lot of torque behind it, that's very smooth, you won't get platter variations. So obviously then you have a direct drive system, and direct drives have their own potential problems.
Yeah.
Because they tend to be pulsed. So you can smooth that out by having a high mass platter. But there are other things you can do to get rid of the pulses, especially now with microelectronics and really interesting software. Even though they're pulsed drive, you can anticipate and make a waveform. In fact, I had done this at IBM Research, where I had a laser. I invented a laser micro machining process at IBM when I worked at IBM Research, and I needed to shut the laser off. So I had a mechanical shutter blocking the laser, and it had to move incredibly fast.
Yeah.
Galvanometer. So how did I make it move faster than it normally could? I used what's called an arbitrary wave generator. So I drew the waveform I wanted, and I had this huge spike, and then a negative spike, and then I was taking care of the mass, the ringing, and then I drove it with a 300-watt MOSFET audio amplifier. So I got that shutter to go like this without shaking or doing this. So there are ways of making a direct drive motor where you anticipate electronically the physics of the pulsing, and you make a certain waveform to compensate for that, and you get a really smooth rotation. So a properly designed direct drive is not going to degrade over time, and it theoretically can have a very smooth drive performance. So I hope that explains my understanding in a simplified way of the differences of the three basic types of turntable design.
Well, I'm being very selfish with that question because I recently obtained a Garage 301, which was one of the projects for the channel. And I had a friend of mine rebuild the base with the Japanese style craftsmanship, technology, philosophy, fix the cracks and all that stuff. But I got an Audio-Technica 1501 arm because Frank Schroeder apparently says that it's a good arm. And it doesn't have anti-skating, this arm. I think it was a broadcast arm. And I was going to ask you.
Do you know how to fix that?
How?
Tilt the turntable, the upper left corner, tilt it up, and then put something under the other 2 feet on the lower left and upper right feet. Tilt it until you get the right effect. Instant anti-skating.
Well, I was going to ask you, does it matter so much the anti-skating when you have a 12-inch arm?
Sure, it's physics. Try putting it on the dead wax region, and what you'll see is the arm is flying in too fast. Try it. Try it. I mean, that's the test. And then jam something under the left corner, bring it up slowly, and then something under the other 2 feet so it doesn't rock until you get it to move in slowly. You're done.
Interesting.
Cheap.
Yeah.
Cheap can be elegant, can be good if it's done right.
Yes. Well,
by the way, that's not what my parents said when I was born. They took a look at me. When I was born, I was so ugly they slapped my mother.
Not your father.
He wasn't there. God knows where. I don't think he was there when I was conceived, actually.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your time. You're a busy man. I hope I get to try your cartridges someday over here. And I hope you stay safe. And I know our viewers are really going to enjoy all the information. What a wealth of information you've given us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being so interested, Pedro. It's wonderful to know you. And I know these are very challenging times for musicians. I just heard another story. And so the world's a very challenging place. And I hope the young people take a lesson from it. Fortunately, those of us in an older generation, it's good to have a reminder about how we need to treat each other because it's a rough planet. And we get reminders that it is a rough planet. So we need to find a way to love each other. There isn't anything else. The default plan is not pretty. No. So loving each other is the way to go.
Yeah, and at least as audiophiles, we still have music in our hearts at home and continue to buy crap.
Yeah, right. A very wise man once told me that all art and science are a bridge to higher worlds. So there's something in us that senses that art and science lead us to a higher place. So we're kind of magnetized and drawn to it. So.
Wow. So, okay, Peter, thank you so much. And looking forward to talking to you another time.
Good. I hope the people in Spain speak enough English to get my jokes.
I will translate them.
Oh, maybe. Wonderful. Okay.